Welcome to another edition of The Democratic View, and I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, involved in a very heated discussion with my old friend, Zach Cohen, a former candidate for supervisor, a multi-talented man, and very learned, I might add. He just won a prize for his photograph at the Guildhall exhibition.
Thank you.
And that must be a nice feather in your cap.
It is. I will call it beginner's luck. I mean, I used to do a lot of photography, but I decided finally to get into digital, bought a digital camera and just got lucky.
You're also a very accomplished pianist.
That I'm working at. That I have to work at.
Oh, well, anyway, you're here today to talk about a very important, really important, I think more important than I ever realized, issue, which is deer management. You have been appointed to that committee as the chairman, am I correct?
Well, I might say that it seems as if nobody else was willing to run the meetings. And I do consider it a very, very difficult problem, but I don't shy away from difficult problems. So also, traditionally, the deer management was a subcommittee of the Nature Reserve Committee, where I am the chair.
Yes, I know.
That ended.
Should have mentioned that.
That ended actually. I don't want to get too political, but some people feel there was a connection to when I was nominated to run for supervisor, the Deer Management Committee stopped being part of the Nature Reserve Committee and went off on its own. Now it looks like it's coming back. So it was more a sense of people looked around and said, okay, who can run this meeting? And I started, and that's how it's gone.
I'm going to start with a few personal things about deer.
Yeah.
Now, we all know Bambi, we all saw the movie, we all loved him, we all cried. And my daughter is a vet tech at the Wildlife Rescue Center in Hampton Bays.
Oh, really?
And one time I was getting ready to come here to do my shows, and always, the last minute, because you got to do everything, to look good, as good as you can. And she called me and said, Mom, there's a deer on Cedar Street, and it's been injured, and the woman in the house is an old woman, and she won't go out the door, and I gotta know what's going on with that deer, because that's one of the things that she takes care of all the time, is deer all over the area, and trying to figure out what's happening. So I said, all right, I'm going that way, I'll stop. I pull up to this house, and there's a bunch of deer, and they run away when they see me. I said, oh, well, look at that. The deer is probably fine. So I'm going to go up to the door and knock on that lady's house and tell her that the deer is okay. I go to her front door, and there behind a hedge is an injured deer who looks up at me. I look at him, those big black eyes, tries to get up, and he can't. I ran away. I called my daughter and said, don't ever ask me to do that again. I cried, mascara coming down my eyes, all the way to here. She called Dr. Turetsky, who does wonderful work, and he came out and euthanized the deer.
Yes.
So I've always been very conflicted about deer. We had this whole thing with the Farm Bureau wanting to bring in all these sharpshooters to kill 3,000 deer, which amazed me. And then yesterday, I drove up to northern Westchester along the Sawmill River Parkway, one of the most beautiful parkways you'll ever be on. I could not I mean, I almost went off the side of the road, looking at the understory that is in those woods going up to Mount Kisco. It was lush, green, varied, so rich. I have preserve near me. There's nothing in the understory, nothing. And what will happen to the woods as those trees age and die and get knocked down with storms? So there is this part and there is that part. And that's what my illustration is to you. And I lay it at your lap to tell me what you're going to do about it.
Well, first I'm going to say, I think you always look wonderful on your show and off the show. So I wouldn't say
paid him
as
for
best.
that, folks.
But you just did a lot of my job. And I don't take the moral issues lightly, but I understand and respect all the different people and their positions. My main position has to be one as a public servant or helping the other public servants. We're advisory, but we probably have a lot of importance in the decision. You hit a lot of the topics. We'll go from the last one back. Yesterday, I ran a Nature Preserve Committee meeting, and Lisa DeAndrea from she's the person in the planning department who handles native vegetation, revegetation, and things. And we were talking about, I always assumed deer management had been part of Nature Preserve Committee before because that's where the hunting happened. But now I see them intimately related because the technical term she taught us yesterday is recruitment. There is no recruitment going on for the replacements. That's the term for the replacement of the forest. And as you know, I'm very fortunate to live on 6+ acres, have a ton of hickory and oaks. There are no saplings. There's no 2-year-olds. There's no 3-year-old oak trees. There are a few trees that are making it up. The cedars are so extensive. The American beech trees, but they're very limited in geography. But the standard forest and the understory, as you're saying, we won't have it in 20, 30 years, especially with the storm. So that's, you have that issue.
But by the way, it wasn't just trees. It was all kinds of different bushes. I kept doing this and this and this. It was beautiful.
My house is. We needed, we could have used a machete. To get in to look at our property when we bought it in the 90s, you had to cut your way in because it was an old farm field that had been left for 20, 30, 40 years in some parts. And we cleared some for a house. Then we cleared some to try to do a meadow restoration, which is something else I'm interested in. But we left, in some places, hundreds of feet of buffer of the natural growth. You couldn't see when I built more than 20 feet into the woods. Now, my house is 700 feet from Spring Fireplace Road. Looking through 300 feet of what used to be forest, I see cars 700 feet away through the forest. They eat the greenbrier. And it's also changing the ecology a lot in terms of pheasants, rabbits. It's having a major effect. The different type of songbirds you get. You're going to get more raptors for birds, and so you definitely get those effects. That is one of the major issues. Probably one of the reasons that we'll look at it a lot under deer management. You can't also discount the immense number of vehicle and car collisions, and I'm sure that only a fraction of them get reported. That there's a lot more that people, they don't want to talk about it, or it's $300 or $400 damage. They don't want to report it to their insurance company. But we know there's at least 200 to 300 deer every year that are dead by the side of the road from these, and then we figure there's another couple hundred who run into the woods 100 or 200 feet. And we've had a few deaths from these collisions. Then Though I admit, you see, there's always another side. A lot of those, if you tracked them down, if people weren't speeding, you probably get rid of about half of those. As you know, up in
Yes.
our area, people drive 50 miles an hour on Springs Fireplace Road.
Well, I always say anyway, when I'm driving at night, I switch between brights and low beams all the time.
Yes.
And I mean, I
Yeah.
can turn a corner and see them on the side of the road. You can see them.
Yes.
Even if you're speeding, not that I have speed, but you can see them if you are really paying attention
Yes,
and
I
not
agree.
texting or listening to something
Yes,
else,
I agree.
I think that those collisions really can be avoided, and they are terrible. They are terrible because they do run into the woods and die painful deaths.
Yes. So those are clearly major public policy issues. There's also people, certainly, there's the Business Alliance and others have been saying for years that the deer fencing that keeps coming up by the mile every year, or in new deer fencing in East Hampton, is sort of creating a look that is not desirable when you drive around, and all these little gates, around
Yeah.
and things. It also concentrates the problem even more outside of those areas. You've got we're fortunate to be on the ARF Garden Tour this year, but I will say that it's rather cost us a fortune as we've tried to fix the place up, buying deer-resistant plants that don't turn out to be deer-resistant anymore, that were deer-resistant 10 years ago. I mean, we're serious amount of money that the deer have eaten, and it gets worse every year, because my view is that they have eaten through so much of their native habitat. They keep eating things that are less and less part of their desirable food chain, but they have to eat something. So there's clearly a problem. There's clearly a problem.
There is clearly a problem.
Then the questions come, how do you go about solving it? How do I go about it? And I'm a person who will pace up and down thinking about, because it wasn't well known, but I was actually an officer on a no-kill animal shelter when I was put in the nature reserve in 2002. So I do not particularly like harming animals. So we went through that very same debate even back then over, say, feral cats and things like that. Do you try to trap them and spay them, or is it more humane to put them to sleep, euthanize them? But so it's and as I said, I certainly empathize with the people who are horrified by, say, the concepts of hunting or things like that.
And I want to just also hit on the tick issue, because I'm an old Fire Islander for many, 35 years there, and we had Lyme's disease, and we had many times, before the deer ever even came, because they were way down at a park, and I was way west of them, and we were still having cases of the Lyme's disease, and we knew that it was the white-footed mouse that
Right.
was the main
That's
host
right.
of the and
Right.
who's going to get, are we going to be able to get rid of them? Well, we used
Okay.
Daminex,
Right.
which we did all over the property, all over everybody on that part of.
Boy, you're a perfect interviewer because you know so much. So let me go say a couple things. And one is my approach, because my feeling was, in a way, the deer management plan that was adopted is something of a misnomer. I considered it more of a catalog of options, and really the decision-making apparatus behind it, what would trigger one decision over another, was really missing. And unfortunately, that's the more politically charged even, and it's the more difficult. And I figure a couple things. One, I have to be willing to meet with everybody, listen to everybody, read. I've read hundreds of pages now on different scientific studies. Bring as much science in as possible, either the full committee or sub portions of the Deer Management Committee has now had 2 meetings with scientists on non-lethal methods and who are practicing non-lethal methods and whether they're applicable yet, or have they reached the stage that we could recommend them or not. I've been in touch with another group who's tried it. I've been in touch with groups who have done organized local hunters into doing culls instead of hiring hunters. So I'm trying to, I want to portray as much as possible science behind it, and something you just brought up, which is even people who say, well, we have to take the deer population down 50% because of Lyme disease, and I have to look at them and say, we don't know yet in East Hampton how much that's going to reduce Lyme disease. The science is still very young. Fire Island is very different than East Hampton. In Fire Island, you could have a lot of success and then probably go to a non-lethal method for stabilizing the herd.
Well, I am going to interrupt you to tell you about what I do know about what we did in Fire Island.
Yes.
Which is because my other daughter was
Yes.
a part, who lived there for a year, was a part of a program of doing something, and I can't quite remember exactly what it was, but it was a way of not sterilizing.
No, I think they use contraceptive there.
It was a contraceptive,
Yes.
Exactly. It was a
Yes.
contraceptive,
I know
and it dealt
the-
with the females.
That's
And I
right.
got to tell you, 2 years ago, I went to Fire Island,
Mm-hmm.
where there was no vegetation ever. It
That's
was
correct.
all sand, used to be, is overgrown with vegetation
I
now.
agree. And
Big
this is,
butterfly bushes and things like that,
Right.
that I thought, what the heck happened to Fire Island? It's green. It never was. And it's
What-
deer control.
yes, one of the issues is there that once they got the population down, they have only a very small amount of migration of new deer coming in. And one of the big differences in East Hampton is that we have rather porous borders. And so we just spoke to a professor who's just a wonderful scientist at Cornell, who is doing an experiment on non-lethal methods on the Cornell campus, and where they're surrounded, I think, at least on 3 sides with areas where there's hunting and deer can come in. And he said, sad to say, he really couldn't recommend a non-lethal method at the moment at the level of population we have in East Hampton, because even his own, where he had like 95 deer on campus, 5 years later, he had succeeded in sterilizing like 95% of the does, and he actually still had more deer. There was 105 deer now. And there was just so much migration. And what happens when you have migration is it isn't too hard in the beginning to catch all the does you need to catch to give them a shot or to sterilize them, whichever method you're using. But then to try to pick out the couple new deer that come into a herd years later, every year, it can take hours and hours and hours of paid help. It starts to get more and more expensive. I would love to have a non-lethal method to recommend in the future, or exactly for an area like yours, which is kind of the tip of a peninsula up in Clearwater.
Yes.
But it's very expensive. I don't think we're there yet. But yours is the kind of area that keeps me up at night, because obviously we can't have hunters going up and down the streets on half-acre lots.
With
So-
children playing in the street.
Exactly.
And I have children playing in my street, and it always scares me when they talk about guns.
And I'm nervous. I'm bothered because I hate not having an answer, but I don't really have one yet for every area of East Hampton or what the future is going to be. But on the other hand, we only had our first meeting at the third week of March. So I'm still, I'm still searching, and that's what's going on. We will be recommending opening up more of the town's preserve lands to hunting. That there was a change in New York state law that's going to allow more of them to be open.
Yeah, but I got preserve on the side of me and to the front of me. I hope it doesn't mean that land.
It's probably, no, we didn't look at any that small.
Okay, good.
I don't think anything is smaller than 10 plus acres, something like that we're looking at. But in the past, we couldn't even hunt things that were that size because of certain rules, but now some of them you can. We may try to find, though, for example, near where I live, there are a number of people live on 3 acres and 4 acres. It will now be possible for as few as 3 of those neighbors if they wanted to get together and have a hunter come. Now, some of the things I should also say here so that people understand this. One of the areas that the local hunters and our committee are absolutely committed to is donating food to the food pantries. So I should say that I now have met, I didn't come from this background, a lot of the local hunters, and every single one of them has told me the same thing, which is once they get the amount of deer meat into their freezer for them for the winter, from that point on, there are a couple butchers, some in town, some out of town, and there's a very developed program. 1 year, this is processed dressed meat. 1 year, 4 tons got given to the food pantry. The local food pantries. We're averaging, it'll probably go up this year, 2.5 tons a year that get of deer that are processed and turned into the food pantries.
One of the things that worries me about and maybe this is something you can do some research on, is I have heard, and I see it in my own neighborhood, that when a deer dies, is killed or dies, that the deer will populate more.
We
For
discussed
instance,
this yesterday.
I see a lot of twins. I know
We
that.
discussed this yesterday. There are different points of view. Some of the theories about this have come from other species where it's been observed and it was extrapolated. This is why, as I said, I try to listen. I try to say, well, where'd you hear that? Do you have a report for me to read? And I try to bring some science to it. The one thing that I am not decided yet on, there's some people feel that there's some kind of something psychic kicks in where the deer actually sense the diminishment of the herd or things like that. There's actually been the reverse. There have been studies that shown that deer that are under predation, so if they felt that they were being predated, they would actually reproduce less. There is one thing I can substantiate that just makes a lot of sense. As the deer get more and more in relation to the amount of food they have, they tend to both produce less twins and also less of them survive, especially through difficult winters. If you have a cull or whatever, if you have an extensive hunting season that brings the population down below what normal mortality would do, you now have a lot more food available for a lower number of deer, and naturally they tend to be healthier, tend to also have more multiple offspring survive because there's more food to get them through the winter. So that I'm pretty convinced does happen, which all has to do with one of the things that has to be pointed out, because people have to accept this if we go the route of extensive hunting, is once you bring down the population, you have to find a way to keep it there. And it's either going to be non-lethal hunting or a mix of the two of them, or else the forests start coming back, they start eating more, they start populating again, and you get right back, and you've spent a lot of money and a lot of aggravation and for something that was just short term. So it's a very difficult problem.
I think we have a word for it. I think it's called a conundrum.
Well, as I said, I wish I felt that I could give an answer for, we're going to start here, we're going to do this, I can give you a couple if-thens, we're going to get to this point, and I feel very confident about it. I can't. I do feel that there are certain initial moves we have to make. As you say, it's clear that from a public policy point of view, we're not divorcing, say, from moral or the rights of deer versus the rights of man, just from a public policy point of view, and I think most of the people feel there are too many deer. And the only way at the moment that it's financially feasible to make a fast reduction would be through hunting.
And perhaps maybe after that, doing something a little bit more on the reproductive cycle.
I'm hoping. And the village is poised to possibly start a program.
Well,
And
listen,
I would
Zach,
love.
I am awfully glad you're doing this and not me. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming. What a problem, isn't it?